Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. People who live in secluded towns. What's the darkest thing that's happened that is still kept a secret? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. In the early 1990s, a town in my small county in the southern U.S. had a fire in a chicken processing plant. When workers tried to escape, it became apparent that the fire exits and other exits had been locked. Dozens of people died around the exits in desperation in a town of around 2,000. Our state suppressed the investigation due to lobbyists, and families received almost none of the compensation funds. I'm pretty sure there's a song about it. I didn't live there, but it was about 20 minutes away. A farm town in Washington is where the Mr. Hands incident occurred. People there still don't acknowledge the event. For the uninitiated, a guy enticed a horse to penetrate him in the buttocks and inadvertently killed him. My grandpa's father was murdered by the wealthiest man in a town a long time ago. I'm not 100% sure of the exact year. Money exchanged hands with law enforcement, and nothing ever came of it. Until one day, my grandpa's anger about the situation boiled over, and he threatened to kill the man in retribution. Law enforcement caught wind of it, and in order to save the cover-up, they forced him to leave town or be arrested. He moved from that small town bordering two southern states, hint, it's a mashup of two states into one, up to Ohio. He met my grandma, and now I exist. So at least I can blame a murderer for every bad thing that happens to me, since I wouldn't have existed without his crime. I wouldn't say we live in a secluded town, but when my mother was in school, her best friend got a job working for the sheriff. She later came to school and told them that the sheriff had been molesting her. She also began telling people about what they had been using the tunnels under the town for. The police, supposedly, had been filming CP. After that day, she never made it back home. She was found later, naked, hog-tied, and shot in the back of the head. No one could prove it, and the sheriff had been suspected of many things, but nothing ever came of it. They just announced that there was a man seen in a white van abducting people, but her friends knew. Her family knows. This is Red Bluff, California, by the way. The tunnels were originally used by Chinese immigrants. They go through our main street and through Rio Street. They lead to houses and some businesses, but they've been condemned. There are sensors down there, though, so if you get in, the police are right there to get you out. I would imagine that corruption in a small town setting with law enforcement could be something that happens. Not imagine, it does happen, so terrible. And what can we do to stop it? My mom told me this story once. Back when she was growing up in a small farming community in Ohio, there was some kind of neighborhood party attended by a bunch of families with kids and all around the same age. All the kids, including herself, had this big slumber party in the basement. They wake up the next morning, and one of the kids is found in the middle of the road, having been hit by a truck, but with his whole body zipped all the way up in his sleeping bag. None of the kids owned up to doing it, and the adults could never figure it out either. After a while, people just started moving on with their lives, and everyone pretty much forgot about it. A 17-year-old girl was arred and murdered while walking home from school. The town went into panic mode, and a homeless man was caught and arrested for the crime. The case is closed, right? Later, it was found out that she was in a relationship with a judge's son, and he and some older guys from wealthy local families were seen in a car picking her up around the time of the crime. They all moved to different cities. Nothing ever came of it. A homeless man is still in jail. Several young boys aged 9 to 11 went missing in the village, and it was suspected that a group of boys from the same school were responsible. They were heard talking about it on 2 occasions, about how they killed whoever they don't like. However, their parents apparently attested that they never let them out of sight among the school hours. This group of kids was known for skipping school to sniff glue and drink alcohol, by the way. But their parents obviously denied it. Only one of the 6 missing person kids were ever found in a creek with injuries like being stoned to death. Police said he fell down the creek accidentally, though. This was about 20 years ago, in Europe, by the way. Nothing with me, but when my mom was a kid, she lived near a state park in New Hampshire. It's called Bear Brook. In the 1980s, multiple dismembered body parts were found in a blue barrel. An investigation happened, but the killer was never found. In the early 1990s, another barrel was found, dating back to the time of the first barrel. The killer was recently found. His name was Robert Evans. The park is in Allenstown, if you want to look it up. When my mom was growing up, a teacher and his wife were killed by an axe murderer. Someone broke into their house and killed them in the middle of the night. They found the husband in the house and the wife in the woods behind it, indicating that she tried to escape and was chased down. Really gruesome stuff. The attack was seemingly random, and they never caught the person responsible. My elementary school was named after the teacher, which wouldn't necessarily be morbid, except for the fact that there was a dedication plaque that mentioned his murder. In an elementary school, the 90s were effing wild. Probably that old guy who had like 8 children SA'd 2 of his daughters, R'd his stepdaughter multiple times, getting her pregnant and completely mentally impaired in the process, and also mentally and physically abusing the rest of the family, letting one of his sons die from pneumonia because he refused any treatment and in the end tried to force his wife to buy him the way out of prison. Ask anyone outside of the town, and they will have never heard of him. But I remember him pretty clearly, since I was also friends with one of his sons, my age, and almost entirely of the rest of the family. I was at their house pretty often when I was younger, until my parents forbade me from going there again, because I later found out that around that time the first accusations became public, since one of his daughters had moved out and reported everything to police. In the 80s and early 90s, my town was completely run by dirty cops. Drugs were given by the cops, and people who didn't do as they were told would get mysteriously missing, and eventually most of them wound up dead. It took the feds to clean the place up and install new set of clean pops. It's still happening in my town. This specific event happened directly in my gated neighborhood. A member of the Russian gang got his house shot up before they went inside to finish the job. My wife saw them drag out the body. Organized crime bosses live in my town and the 2 neighboring towns. I live in New Jersey. My town isn't very secluded, but I think this still works. So there is a building that used to be a hotel. And one day this guy shows up and he takes multiple trips going in and out with a bunch of equipment. They found him a little later while in his room. He had assembled an entire guillotine and cut his own head off. There was a sheriff in my town in rural Louisiana, and he was sheriff for about 40 years. Well, our parish at the time, when he was sheriff, had the highest rate of meth production and weed production in the state. There was one particular meth dealer that was never arrested, but somehow someone on the other side of the parish would get raided, and a bunch of other people would go to jail, but never him. As it turns out, who was a relative of the sheriff. That sheriff let meth and the money it generated control of our parish for decades, while he slowly got rich, bought a big house, bought new cars, and always got reelected. Even though all the locals know about this, no one cares, because new cars and always got reelected, and family has been here since the old families founded the town. Or, better yet, he's just a good old sheriff who keeps the drugs out of our parish. What's really sad is that some corrupt public officials will use a person's meth-abusing family members as voter suppression or leverage in elections. A family friend was super drunk. He was walking home and fell unconscious on the road at the bottom of a hill. Another family friend from a small town, so we all knew each other, was driving home late. He heard a thump and a crunch when he went over a hill. He got out of the car thinking he hit a wallaby or something. Instead, he found his friend dead. Everyone decided to forget what he did because it really wasn't his fault. There was just no way he could have seen him asleep at the bottom of the hill in the middle of the road. It was such an angle that the headlights didn't spot him. It's a bit weird that this has come up, because I drove past a super drunk dude just a few hours ago on my way home from work. He was drunk and stumbling on the road when he fell over and lost a thong flip-flop. To you Americans, I called the police and told them they said they'd pick him up and take him home where he would be safe. I didn't want to or repeat of what happened back in my hometown to the random drunk guy. Small town of about 2,000 to 2,500 in the Midwest, when suddenly about a quarter of the population just up and left. No word, no nothing. None of them had kids or extended family, and none of the papers said anything about it. This was back maybe in the late 80s. This happened when I was pretty young, but I just remember one day one of my teachers wasn't there, and I found out from parents that a ton of people had just left overnight. Most personal belongings were taken with them, but mattresses and furniture were still at the houses. I still have no clue what that was about, and when I asked my partners more recently, they said the rumor about the town was that all those people worked for the CIA or FBI and were finally reassigned all of a sudden. The daughter of divorced parents was AR'd to death by the mother's boyfriend. She was 6. Her father was contacting CPS and presenting evidence that the man was abusing his daughter under her mother's care. Nothing was done about it until she was life-flighted to Salt Lake, where she died of her wounds. And early in the investigation, the mother admitted to letting her boyfriend play with her. The worst part is that because of the abuser or murderer or part of the tribe, all he had to do was stay on the tribal lands to not be taken in custody. So during the long process of an FBI investigation and the FBI jumping the correct hoops to make an arrest on a tribal land, this man walked freely as long as he was on the reservation. Most people rejected the abuser or murderer entirely, but what hurts more is seeing the people who went out of their way to help him. His family tried to open a food truck where the highway passes through the reso so he could have a job. It earned a large protest considering the size of the town, and a few out-of-towners stopped for tacos, so they fortunately had to shut down. The man's cousin, Chief, so he was given a job in the dispensary. Some other members of the tribe who worked there walked out on the job and went to the council to try and stop it. Fortunately, as of now, the FBI has taken the mother and boyfriend into custody, and they're awaiting trial. I've been called for jury duty twice now, and it's been canceled each time.